Let's talk Georgia football with Jed May from UGAsports.com. How's it going, Jed?
Good. Got a pretty big game coming up in
Pretty
Athens this
big.
weekend,
Pretty
so
big.
we're in the home stretch now. Looking forward
Yeah,
to
you
it.
could call it pretty big. I was gonna start off. I had a few things I wanted to start off talking to you about today, and then you just like nailed me. You floored me when I asked you my first question off the air. I asked this a lot just to find out what's going on. You know, nicks and bruises behind the scenes. How's everybody doing? I asked you about how's injuries. Did not expect to hear what you told me. So give me the big news because this is, and I'm sure, of course, most diehard Georgia fans know what's going on. But if you haven't figured this out yet, this is a big one.
Yeah, so senior outside linebacker Nolan Smith is going to miss torn pectoral muscle in his right shoulder. He hurt it against Florida in the first quarter. He came out there, was immediately ruled out the rest of the game. So that's already an indication that something wasn't good. But after the game, Kirby Smart was kind of, we don't know how bad it is. It might be a separated shoulder, kind of vague there. But reports came out Tuesday morning that it's a torn pec and Nolan Smith's out for the year. So that's huge because obviously he's one of the best players on this defense. He's a top pass rusher. He's great at defending the run, but I think even more than that, he's an emotional leader for this team. He's a leader. He gets guys lined up. He's the heart and soul of at least the defense and maybe even the team as a whole. So going into a game against Tennessee, I mean, him and probably Christopher Smith are probably the two guys that you could least afford to lose. And obviously Georgia's going to be down one of them against Tennessee. So that's going to be on guys like Chaz Chambliss to step up, guys like freshman Marvin Jones, MJ Sherman, who's a guy that came in as a highly touted recruit. People have been waiting to break out. All those guys are going to have to fill those shoes on Saturday afternoon against the Volunteers.
Just want to let everybody know we're having a little bit of a frozen weird thing you're witnessing with your video. I can hear you perfectly though, Jed, and that's the major thing. So I'm going to let that run just in case it catches up. The video catches up to the audio. I'm going to let it run, but I won't make you look bad. But again, the audio is most important. So let's go. Oh, wow. That is because obviously this is the Our Lads Football Network. So the main thing is scouting here. And we're going to do our first scouting show for the 2023 draft on Friday. And we weren't going to talk linebackers, but maybe we will definitely have to talk a little bit about this because, this is just such a big. All you have to do is just take a look at all those great players that came out last year. He would have been a part of that greatness. He would have been right there. He's that good. How does he actually compare to some of the great linebackers that have come out of Georgia recently?
So he's more of the edge pass rushing. I would be interested to see how he projects the NFL. I think he's size wise, he'd probably be a 3-4, outside guy. But yeah, I mean, he's kind of like he came out of high school and he was a super, super highly rated recruit, and he's never like had those like a Will Anderson season last year, right? Where he's in the Heisman conversation, all that kind of stuff. But he's just such a solid player. Like I mentioned, he defends the run so well. He's very technically sound. And it's a huge loss for the Georgia defense. I mean, when you look at a guy like Nakobe Dean last year and what he did in the middle of the defense, getting guys lined up and everything. I think Nolan was in that kind of role this year, even as an outside guy. Just he's been in this at Georgia for so long and played so much football for these guys. He pretty much knew everything that teams are going to throw at him. So it's a huge loss, no doubt. I'm very Georgia's pass rush hasn't been like world beaters this year, but there's so much other stuff that Nolan Smith does that it's going to have an impact on Saturday for sure.
And yeah, because the thing is, Nolan is, I think he's a better prospect, NFL prospect, because of his size. Mm-hmm. We all know Dean, the reason we slid into the draft is because of his size, and that's just the way it is. But yeah, Nolan is, in my opinion, I think he had the talent to be a top 10 draft pick. I really do. And now I'll find out more about that with our scouting draft expert on Friday. But That's how good he is. It's a big loss. Is there somebody that can replace him? Because at linebacker, he is an edge guy, but the top linebacker on the team outside of Nolan, would that be Dumas Johnson?
Yeah, Dumas Johnson is kind of the inside guy, the guy filling Nakobe Dean's shoes. Has done a great job. I think he's gotten better and better throughout the year. The more he's played, Smile Mondon inside as well, who's coming off of an injury but played against Florida, so he's getting back healthy there. But on the edge, Chaz Chambliss is the guy that came in and replaced Nolan against Florida. And thing there is he's been dealing with a little bit of a hamstring that's hadn't kept him out, but it's one of those nagging things that everyone has at this point in the year. So a guy I'm interested to see is Marvin Jones, 5-star freshman. Don't think he played at all against Florida because Kirby Smart told us he was dealing with the flu. So assuming he's kind of over that by Saturday, how does he sort of factor into the rotation, especially now that the team has a week? I mean, even before the news that it was season ending, it kind of sounded like Nolan wasn't playing against Tennessee either way.
Okay.
So with a full week to prepare, knowing that Nolan won't be on the field, what does that kind of rotation look like opposite Robert Beal, who's been, kind of like Nolan, steady as she goes on the other side?
Is this the Florida State Jet Marvin Jones Jr.?
He was a legacy at Florida State. I think he's from Miami.
That's it. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That's him then. So, yeah. Interesting.
I
was actually friends with Marvin when he was playing with the Jets back in. That was like when I was in my late 20s down in South Florida doing talk shows. We had shows at the Pete Rose Ballpark Cafe in Boca Raton, Florida, and he was he came on a show, and at that point we became friends. I know one of my on-air partners, who I still talk to today, is still in touch with him, still does some work with him. So I got to contact Marvin and see how his.
Yeah, Georgia swooped in really late. Like, they got him on an official visit. I want to say like the week between the regular season finale and the SEC championship. They got him on campus for an official visit and just knocked it out of the ballpark. And 3 weeks later, he's signing as a Bulldog. So huge win. And now he's a guy that, it might be even more huge given his role on Saturday.
And he's played. I mean, he's already burned his red shirt, so he's been playing as a true all season, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's been a big special teams guy. He's gotten some reps here and there defensively, mainly as a reserve when you've got two guys that experience ahead of him. But he's a good looking prospect. He's a guy that he's one of those first guys off the bus kind of guys for sure.
Well, he's going to have to step up real soon. Okay, so let's might as well stick on defense then. So Jalen Carter, how's Jalen Carter?
So he back in action against Florida. He played mostly, if not exclusively, in third down packages. But like when he was, you knew when he was out there because every time like, oh man, who's pressuring Anthony Richardson? Oh, it's Jalen Carter again. So he definitely made his presence known. And after the game, Kirby Smart said, yeah, he played a little bit better than even Kirby Smart expected. And he said that Jalen, he felt fine. The MCL sprain that he suffered against Missouri, didn't feel like there was any limitations from that. So now it's about conditioning, I think, which he's been doing a lot of while he's been absent. So I think against Tennessee, you're going to see Jalen Carter more. I don't know that it would be, 100% of the snap count he would have seen if he was totally healthy and this was the start of the year. But and Georgia's going to need him. I mean, let's be
absolutely.
honest. Tennessee offense is something else. So I think the combination of him getting more healthy and Georgia needing him a lot more is going to see that snap count, really, really go up on Saturday afternoon.
All right. And by the way, any other key injuries? And I do have to ask you, because I know it's not an injury situation. We talked about this in the beginning of the year about Eric Gilbert. And I pretty much said, look, I don't want to hear any more of how great Eric Gilbert is. I just want to see us get his life straightened out. First of all, second of all, as a prospect, let's see him play a full season. Let's see what's going, because and it happened again. And what's going on there? Is this something where he just needs to get away from football for a while, which he already has, right?
Yeah, he was away from the team, or I don't know. I don't even know if I would say away from the team. Not necessarily like practicing and dressing out and that kind of stuff. For a couple of weeks, he's back. He actually caught a touchdown against Vanderbilt in garbage time, and that was great to see because this kid's dealt with so much, and it was the team. It was, I think that made it 55-0 in the fourth quarter, but the team went crazy for him. So that was really good to see. Honestly, at this point, I just think he's kind of on the depth chart because you've obviously got Bowers ahead of him. You got Darnell Washington ahead of him. Oscar Delp has done a lot of good things. He's ahead of him. So it's not even as much of a and when you're away from the team, you miss practice reps. And
of course,
you don't blame it on anybody. It is what it is. So, I think he at this moment he's a depth piece, and he's a fantastic depth piece because he's got all the talent in the world. But
everything's okay.
It seems he's back. He's practicing. He made the trip to Florida, which is noteworthy just because you got the travel rosters. You can only take so many people. So he's able to play. I just think he's farther down the depth chart with a lot of talent in front of him.
You think it's just one of these? I mean, we're seeing a lot of young kids today having problems. Do you think it's just one of those things? He's just having problems adapting, whether it's to school life or whether it's again, I'm not a shrink, but it just seems like a lot of kids nowadays have a lot more problems today, psychologically.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, there's like you said, there's 1,000 other things that it could be. But I think what Georgia has done a good job of is supporting him throughout this whole thing. Like I don't remember what game it was. It was early in the year, late in the game. He was on, I want to say, field goal protection team or punt or something, and Eric had a false start. And so Georgia did. I can't remember what it was. It turned a field goal into a punt or go for it into a punt, something like that.
Okay.
And he comes off the field, and instead of lighting him up, Kirby Smart pats him on the helmet and talks to him, and some people say, "Oh, why is Kirby coddling him?" But I think other than that, it's a coach that understands each guy is different. Each guy has a different coaching style that they need. And I think Georgia's done a good job of it. Every time Kirby Smart's been asked about him, even when he was away from the team this year, we're supporting Eric. We're trying to get him back. We're trying to get him, like you said, just get his life straightened out as a person first. And then whatever happens football-wise is what it is. So I think Georgia's done a good job of supporting him. And we'll see if, kind of like we were just talking about with Marvin Jones, if something happens to one of the guys in front of him, then he could be a guy that could play a big role down the stretch.
Absolutely. And again, one of those other tight ends is Darnell Washington, who if he was on if he was on one of 90 other teams or 95 other teams in Division I college football, he'd be the man. It's just amazing to have two quality tight ends on the same roster with catch averages over 17. That's just unheard of. So just taking a look, Ladd McConkey, the number one guy, we kind of knew that would be the case when the season began. But who's the number two?
So that's when you talk about injuries. A.D. Mitchell suffered an ankle sprain against Samford, second game of the year, really early. Hasn't really played since then. He dressed out for a couple games. He ran a couple routes. He got on the field against, I want to say it was Auburn. I don't know if that was a situation where it re-aggravated the injury or what, but he hasn't. I mean, he didn't even dress out against Florida. Okay. So I think he would be the number one, and McConkey would be the number two, and then things have kind of had to. So it doesn't sound like Mitchell will be back for Tennessee. I could be wrong, but reading the tea leaves from the past couple of weeks, it doesn't sound good. So you look at discounting Brock Bowers as your number two receiver.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
You've got Marcus Rosemary. Jack Saint has stepped up. He's made some big catches the past couple weeks. Dominic Blaylock has really had a nice season in his return from a couple knee injuries, although he had some back spasms against Florida. Should be back. Kyrus Jackson, the old war horse is still
around
as ever. So
yeah,
it's really a by committee thing, and you've got Bowers, you've got Washington. Georgia's has thrown the ball to their running backs like Kenny McIntosh a ton this year. So and think about McConkey. McConkey has had a bit of an up and down year. He struggled with drops. He had a big drop in Florida. He had some punt. He's a punt returner. He's muffed a few punts. So he's kind of been in a funk the past probably month or so.
Okay.
The drop against Florida was one that hit him right in the hands. It probably would have been about a 30, 35-yard gain. Okay. So, but yeah, it's really just a by committee. Oh, you've got Dylan Bell as a freshman who's really stepped up. I think I remember talking about him before the season started. He's kind of emerged into a productive role, and it's really just. I mean, the by committee approach is a cliche, but it really is. I don't think there is a certain number one, number two, number three. It's kind of just everybody, whoever's on the field in this personnel package, and they go from there.
Who do you think? Is there somebody that you've noticed along the way that you just say, yeah, you know what? I think that guy is the biggest upside as far as the young receivers?
I think Dylan Bell. Dylan Bell looks fantastic. I mean, I remember saw him in preseason camp, and he looked a lot bigger. Like in high school, he was a Wildcat quarterback for a private school down in Houston, and you're like, oh, okay, this guy could be, a little slot guy, whatever. And then you see him at preseason camp, and I remember I literally looked at him and said, who is that guy? Because he looked fantastic. He's had some great catches. He's a guy that can block well on the perimeter. So that's a guy I think that's got a really high upside. I mean, he had, I think, 2 or 3 catches against Florida. I mean, he's just worked himself into the rotation, and obviously he's had room to do that with neutral sideline. But I think he was a guy that was going to get some playing time either way.
And speaking of freshmen, true freshmen, you have Bell, and you mentioned Jones. Mm-hmm. So Robinson's another one. Branson Robinson. Mm-hmm. Who would you say would be the top true freshman? We just named a few. Any more? Any others that stick out?
Top true freshman. This is an easy one. I would say Malachi Starks, because the kid is I mean, he gets thrown in at and see, the thing is, we don't even think about him because he's just a part of the defense. Yes. You don't even think of him as a freshman, but I mean, he comes in on a second collegiate series and makes a one-handed pretty much interception against Oregon, and it's off from there. Now the thing about Starks, he is still a freshman no matter what we think. So he had a mistake against Florida where he was in cover 2, didn't get over the top of a route, and it went for a 78-yard touchdown. So those are the things that,
sure,
when you look at this Tennessee game, that's what Tennessee does to everybody. They scheme up these receivers getting open, and they make defenses make mistakes in terms of alignment and all that kind of stuff. So that's the thing that would concern me if I was a Georgia fan going into this matchup, is that Georgia hasn't seen a passing attack like Tennessee, because there's not one like Tennessee really out there. So, and the thing is, like, Keely Ringo has had his ups and downs this year. Kamari Lassiter at the other corner is in his first year starting, and has played fairly well, but he's a relatively inexperienced guy. So that would be my biggest thing, is Georgia's got all the talent in the world back there. It's just getting aligned and eye discipline, those kind of things.
Is it one of those things where, like, when you take a look at this year's team, last year's team, I mean, last year's team is just better because they just had more veteran players. It's just, no matter what anybody says, it's just better. You can't say they're not. It is what it is. It doesn't mean this team can't win a national championship. That's just the way that it is. So and this is the game. I mean, we all know this. I mean, it's one thing to lose a game and to say, it's okay, but we still can. If that was the other division, we still can win this division and go on the SEC championship. This is it. With Tennessee's schedule, you lose this game, you're really keeping your fingers crossed that you can sneak your way into the Final Four some way without being in the SEC championship game, which could happen. It still could happen. Right. Especially if even if Alabama goes there and Tennessee wins and beats Alabama, I could see people going, yeah, Georgia better than Alabama. They lost to Tennessee too. Put Georgia in. So that could still happen. What do you think overall? What does your gut tell you about this game with Tennessee? As good as Tennessee is playing, from my perspective, and I talked about this yesterday, we were talking some Alabama football with Ryan Fowler, and he kind of felt the same way I did, that there's just something going on with this Tennessee team this year that you just think, you know what, maybe it's their year.
Yeah, I've kind of got that feeling as well. And the thing about Georgia, and we look at the offensive side of the ball, there's been a lot of games this year where it's felt like, oh, well, the offense played pretty good, but they had a couple penalties that stopped a drive. And, oh, well, they turned the ball over a couple times. And they really didn't play that bad. They just did this and this. Like Florida, okay, they rolled up 550 yards of offense, whatever, but they turned the ball over 3 times. And people say, oh, well, next week we'll avoid the mistake. Next week. At some point, it kind of just feels like you're a team that turns the ball over one too many times. You know what I mean? So that would be my concern if I was a Georgia fan going into Saturday. Is, I mean, if Georgia can avoid turnovers, great. Like, they can move the ball just as well as Tennessee can, especially, against a Tennessee defense that's probably not as good as the Georgia defense.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah.
But I mean, so we'll go positives. Positive, the offensive line is playing better. Georgia's run the ball much better the past 3 games.
Okay.
Stetson Bennett isn't getting touched in the pocket most of the time. So that's progress, but it's just the turnovers. It's like, okay, against Florida guy makes a great tumbling interception. Fine. You chalk that up to, great play. First play of the second half, Kenny McIntosh fumbles. Not good. Next drive, Stetson Bennett, I don't know if it was a bad route, bad throw, interception that you can't have. And Florida turns a 28-3 halftime deficit into 28-20 in about
football
10 minutes of game time.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that's last year's team.
Oh, yeah. No.
Just pummeled everyone except for Clemson. After Clemson, it was just now you could say on the positive side of that, whereas last year's team didn't play a whole lot of 4-quarter games and, they just rolled it. This team has had to respond to adversity at points. They almost.
Yeah, what was the reason in that? What did they make mistakes, or what was it that they almost lost that game?
It was just turnovers. They had 2 fumbles in the first half. I mean, Missouri kept hitting at the same time. Missouri had a huge run that almost went to a touchdown. I mean, you got to give a lot of credit to Harrison Mevis, because that was the game after the Auburn game where Mevis missed the chip shot game winner, and he was hitting. He hit, I think, 5 field goals and 4 over 50 yards, and he was unconscious. But within that game, Georgia's down 10 in the fourth quarter, and they reel off 2 straight touchdown drives and shut Missouri down. So, like, those are things that when adversity hits, they respond. They did the same thing against Florida. They were out 28-20. Florida's on fire, and they rip off 2 straight touchdown drives, and it's 42-20, and the game's over, and they almost cover. So, I don't know. I just, like you said, Tennessee's got some mojo going on. It feels very similar to 2019 LSU. And if you really want to get into that comparison, 2019 LSU had to go beat Alabama in Tuscaloosa. 2022 Tennessee has got to beat Georgia in Athens. So I would pick Tennessee to win if I was picking today.
Especially the Nolan Smith injury is the big one.
That hurts.
That's a big one.
And like, the thing about Tennessee is, like, they're one of those teams that, pass rush, like, they get the ball out quick. So are you going to get a lot of sacks anyway? But setting the edge and defending the run and getting guys lined up, like, there's so much other stuff that Nolan Smith does besides sacking the quarterback.
Sure.
That it's huge. So I would probably pick Tennessee to win, like, a 31-28 kind of game. If I had to pick today is Tuesday. I could feel differently by Thursday or Friday, but that's probably where I lean as of today.
I think if this is a 4-quarter down to the last 5-minute game, that's when I think I would favor Georgia.
Okay. I can see that.
Yeah. Not that I'm going to sit here and say that Tennessee's going to blow out Georgia. I'm just saying that, if they've got the lead early, and they're always got the lead, and they seem to have a 2-score lead, and every time Georgia makes a score, Tennessee comes back, that kind of game. And it just always just seems that Georgia's just out of reach. I can see that happening. That could be the way Tennessee wins. But I just get the feeling that if it's a real close game, knowing where Georgia's been in this situation before, they're the champs. They've felt the pressure. Tennessee really hasn't felt the pressure in this type of situation before. Now that they're this supposedly, really top contender for a national championship, I'm not saying they can't respond. They've got some really good players, but we have seen Georgia respond. Not sure we've seen Tennessee respond in this situation following the Alabama win.
Well, and if you're looking at from a Georgia perspective, 2017, Georgia is number 1. They go to Auburn, and Auburn was probably, 10 or whatever at the time, and Georgia just gets absolutely smoked, just blown off the field by Auburn in Jordan-Hare Stadium. And Tennessee, like last year, Georgia played Tennessee. Tennessee got off to a 10-3. Like, Tennessee's offense looked great in the first quarter, and Georgia makes some adjustments. And that's something that Kirby Smart has done really well during his tenure, is because Auburn has done this a couple of times too, where Auburn's offense, Gus Malzahn, they blow down the field, they score a touchdown, and then nothing the rest of the game. So that's something Kirby Smart has shown he can do as a head coach, is make in-game adjustments. And I was just going to say one last thing. I think being at home for Georgia is going to be huge because Tennessee did play at LSU, but it was at 11 a.m. local. LSU fumbles the opening kickoff and the crowd's out of it right away, right? So, and with what Tennessee does on offense, going fast and all that kind of stuff, a road crowd can really affect that kind of thing. So that's going to be an advantage for Georgia. But at the end of the day, I still think I just got a feeling that Tennessee is going to end up winning this one.
All right, a few other things. You mentioned McIntosh, and it's statistically you got the 4 running backs. It seems like it's interchangeable, but McIntosh the clear number 1 guy because of his receiving ability.
Yeah, I would say so. I think the guy that's really impressed is Dejon Edwards because he comes in. He's not the biggest guy in the world, but he just runs so hard. Like he reminds me a little of Brian Harrion that Georgia had a few years ago, just because they're always falling forward, they're always breaking tackles, they just run so hard. And Dejon has really kind of climbed his way in that pecking order where I'd probably say it's probably a 1A, 1B with McIntosh and Edwards.
Okay.
Just with what Edwards has done, And the thing is, like, Kendall Milton's been hurt, so how do you work him back in the rotation? Sure. He's kind of a bigger bruiser type, but Edwards has just shown me a lot this year. He's a really, really impressive guy. Like I said, not the biggest guy in the world, but can find the holes, and he can, he'll push the pile forward, things like that. He's been huge for this Georgia running game.
Offensive line, Broderick Jones. How has he improved since the start of the season? What kind of a prospect do you think he'll become?
As far as prospect goes, I think he's got all the talent and measurables up to be at minimum a first-round tackle, if not, one of these top 15, top 10 guys. He's solid. I think he's improved in terms of physicality and run blocking. I think that's something that, if I remember right, that's what Kirby Smart said he really wanted to see from him in the early part of this year, fall camp. And, like I told you earlier, Stetson Bennett hasn't been touched a whole lot, and that usually falls a lot on your left tackle. So I think the bigger questions for the offensive line have been at the guard spots. Xavier Truss and Tate Ratledge, they had some struggles earlier in the year. They're kind of settling in. And then right tackle, Warren McClendon, he's been pretty solid all year. Now, another question is, they've had Amarius Mims, who, was rumored to transfer to Florida State in the offseason. He ended up staying. They've been working. It's been a solid rotation. There hasn't been a game this year where Georgia's just stuck 5 guys out there and rolled with it. They rotated Mims in. They rotated Devin Willock in at guard. And Mims suffered a slight MCL injury against Florida. Kirby Smart doesn't seem too concerned about it. That would obviously be a loss, but he's also not a starter. So you've got McClendon and Jones who are experienced there. So, but yeah, I mean, they've got probably seven or 8 guys that regularly play every single game. It's a really, really deep. It's probably not the most pure talent Georgia's had on an offensive line, but it might be their deepest unit that Kirby Smart's had.
And lastly, the recruiting news. What's because you just automatically think everything's great. It's Georgia ever since the turnaround finalized, especially last season with the championship. Now it's like they're just top 5 recruiting class every year. It's just now they did lose Lanning, but still, I don't think there's any reason for us to believe that things aren't going great recruiting wise. Is that the case? Is it still all systems go?
Well, it's funny. Everyone on our message board thinks the sky is falling all the time. So,
really,
someone thinks it's. I mean, that's you get recruiting people and they override Twitter. I think part of that came from over the summer. The top 2 players in the state, safety Caleb Downs, running back Justice Haynes, Georgia legacy, by the way, on Haynes. They both commit to Alabama, and Haynes was a stunner. I mean, just an absolute stunner. Downs a little bit less so. Georgia felt they were in it, but not as much of a shock that he went to Alabama. So that, I think, had kind of people in their feelings a little bit. The class is fine. They missed on Arch Manning, obviously. They've got a 24 quarterback committed, Ryan Puglisi from Connecticut. So offensive class for 23 is mostly sewed up. They're still looking for a second running back. And obviously trying to flip Justice Haynes. That could be a portal situation there. A couple receivers also trying to flip. Anthony Evans from Texas, DeAndre Moore from California. Both of those guys will be in town for the Tennessee game. The big work right now is on the defensive side of the ball, particularly in the front 7. They've got Some edge guys are looking at Samuel Mpemba from IMG Academy, David Hobbs, a defensive end from North Carolina, Jordan Hall, defensive tackle, defensive lineman from Florida. Somebody else, there's another. That's where the main
Okay.
Focus is right now, is that front step, because inside linebacker set, secondary is pretty much set. But the real meat potatoes of this class still to go is in that front seven. And Chidera, you mentioned Dan Lanning leaving. Chidera Uzo-Diribe was hired as the outside linebackers coach. Hit the ground running day one. Has done a fantastic job. I mean, Mpemba's a 5-star guy. Georgia wasn't really in it for before Uzo-Diribe got here, and now Georgia seems like the favorite there. I mean, he's done a fantastic job with a lot of these guys. So I think the next, probably month and a half or whatever till signing day, that's where the main work is going to be, is those guys in the front seven. And if Georgia gets a couple studs there, then Damon Wilson, that's another guy out of Florida that Georgia's really in and on, battling Ohio State. So a couple of studs there, and I think your rational person, which not that there's many of those in recruiting, but your rational person will be very happy with this Georgia class.
Okay. And so who's going to be the starter next year? Is it going to be Beck?
I would bet on Carson Beck at the moment. And now if you'd asked me that at the beginning of the year, I would have been a little less sure, just because Beck hadn't looked great in the actual season. He's looked fantastic. And obviously it's mostly mop-up time and make of it what you will. But he just seems to have such a much better command of the offense. He looks so much more comfortable out there. He had a little bit of a deer in the headlights kind of look.
Sure.
In earlier action. He's looked fantastic in the action he's had. So I would think he would be, at minimum, he'd be a huge favorite. Now, anything can happen in an open competition or whatever. But at minimum, I'd say he's a huge favorite, and I'm betting on Carson Beck to start next year.
So they're and if that works out, then they're in pretty good shape for the next couple of years at quarterback.
I'd say so. I mean, Beck, in theory, could go pro after the 23 season. Obviously, that would depend on what kind of season.
He'd have to blow up next year.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I mean, you've got him. You've got Gunnar Stockton, who's a freshman this year. You've got Brock Vandegrift, who's a 5-star freshman. Obviously, with the state of college football nowadays, someone is probably going to transfer, right? But
yeah.
And then you've got your 2024 quarterback committed, and Ryan Puglisi, who is a good-looking guy out of Connecticut, a guy that I think is going to really rise up the recruiting rankings over the rest of his career. And then yeah, the cycle never stops. There's always the next guy coming up.
Of course.
Right? The most popular quarterback is either the backup or the guy coming in. So Carson Beck will probably get a taste of that next year.
Okay. And so where are they right now? Coming in next year's class, what are they ranked?
I believe on Rivals they are fourth at the moment. If I have it, if I remember off the top of my head.
Top five class.
Top five. Oh yeah, for sure. They've got a lot of meat still on the bone as far as highly touted guys that could end up bringing in. And
I don't expect you to give me like these trade secrets, but what do you think from your experience has been the calling card recruiting wise for Georgia? Like, what's been the turnaround? I always find it amazing sometimes when you get like Texas A&M. And I know NIL's a big part of it, but still, I mean, they've just all of a sudden, not that they're playing well, but all of a sudden, out of nowhere, it's like Texas A&M for 2 straight years. And it's like, how does this happen? Like, I'm assuming the recruiting is just, you got salesmen, and I know how it is. If you get a really good recruiter and recruiters, then it is what it is. But it's got to be more than that.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing is, and Kirby Smart learned this under Nick Saban, recruiting is the lifeblood of a program, right? And it's down to the minute, all these visits and in-home visits and going to kids' games and all that kind of stuff. That's a well-oiled machine. But I think as far as the message, it's NIL is a very small part of Georgia's message right now. Their main pitch is when you come here and get developed, your NFL, draft check is going to be a lot more than the NIL check you're going to get from, Zaxby's or whatever.
That's a good one.
Like I remember a couple of weeks ago, I was down for the dog walk, and I looked up, and you can see into the recruiting lounge where all the recruits hang out, and they had a electronic ticker in there showing the contracts, the rookie contracts of all the guys that got drafted last year
from Georgia. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's I think is the message is
absolutely.
don't go. And then you hear that cliche. It's not a 4-year decision; it's a 40-year decision. I think it's a version of that. It's don't make your decision short-sightedly based on an NIL. Come to Georgia, get developed, and then that might mean not playing your first year. That might mean playing some scout team your first year. But by the time you go to the draft, that staff is telling you they're going to have you ready to go to the draft and make a lot of money, and that's ultimately the goal, right? Is to go to the draft and get those
Yes.
huge checks. Like even these kids, like these you hear these contracts, $8 million over 4 years. Like okay, that's huge NIL, right? If you go first round in the draft, your rookie contract is what 40-45 million dollars. Like that's the message I think is come to Georgia, get developed, and then really cash in a couple years when you hit the NFL.
Well, look, they were doing it before the NIL thing came about anyway.
Exactly.
So Texas A&M
Exactly.
is the one that's really been taking advantage of it. But,
Right.
where were they a couple of years ago? It's like Texas
Exactly.
A&M. I mean, what is this stuff? I mean, just,
Yeah.
I don't know. But
Eyebrow raising for sure.
yeah, but the transfer portal, that does make it a lot more available. And I also think that that's going to bring a little bit more parity into the sport. I think it already has. And I think that's good. 12-team playoff in a couple of years. That's all good. I'm sure, Georgia, Alabama, teams like that, they don't really need to worry about that. But, I think it's really good stuff for the other teams, the ones that are really trying to catch up to the Georgia and Alabamas of the world. So I think it's all good. Jed, appreciate it. Good luck on Saturday. It's going to be a good one. And we think it's going to be a good one. And we hope to get an opportunity to talk to you again at some point, either before the end of the season, if there's an SEC championship game for Georgia, or definitely a bowl game at some point. So appreciate it. And we thank you for taking your time with us again today.
Absolutely. Thanks, man. Anytime.
You got it. Thanks, Jed.